You're watching WBCC-TV, Channel 68, Cocoa, Florida.
I believe the next questioner is Randy Brown.
I'm Randy Brown. I'm from Orlando, Florida. This actually kind of relates to what you were just talking about. I was wondering if Mr. Gagnon could describe the mechanism by which you think plutonium in a breathable form, so it actually hurts you, could be spread over a large Central Florida population during launch. And after you've done that briefly, get a brief response to that scenario.
Could people hear the question in the back? Could you repeat it just briefly, please?
Please describe
closer to the mic, I think.
Please describe the mechanism by which you think plutonium in breathable form could be spread over a large Central Florida population during launch. And after you've described that scenario, I was hoping that somebody from the DOE or the JPL could respond to that scenario.
Well, you know, if you look at the Titan rocket that is going to launch,
WBCC-TV presents the Florida Today community conversation, Cassini, Debating the Risks.
Brevard Community College, through WBCC-TV, is pleased to televise the Florida Today Community Conversations program on the Cassini launch. To begin the program, we've invited the executive editor of Florida Today, Judy Pace Christie, to introduce the program. Judy, could you tell us what people can expect in the next 2 hours?
Certainly, Jim. I think that they can expect a lively debate of a very important issue on the Space Coast, the launch of the Cassini rocket. It is one that has drawn a lot of attention already from people who say that it is very important, that it's a great science mission, to people who say that it is a health threat and a safety threat and not something we should do. So we hope that people will hear a lot of debate, discussion, ideas, and they'll be able to make more informed decisions after they watch the program.
This is part of a long running series that Florida Today has provided the community. Why do you provide the Community Conversation series?
Well, this is actually our 23rd community conversation. We do several each year. We do it because we think it's part of our role to make sure that people are as informed as possible, to bring people together, to discuss, to share ideas, to voice their opinions. That's an important part of the democratic process, as you know.
It's my understanding that when Florida Today has been recognized throughout the past several years as one of the best Gannett newspapers, one of the items cited, in addition to your news coverage, has been your emphasis on the community. And we thank you for what you're doing with this program, and thank you for what you're doing in the community.
Thank you, Jim.
And now we invite you to watch for the next 2 hours as the Florida Today Community Conversation program on the Cassini launch takes place. To begin the program is Mr. Bob Stover, the Assistant Managing Editor of Florida Today.
Thank you for attending this evening. Residents of Brevard County are interested in this Cassini project for many reasons. Some of them are interested in the science, the exploration of Saturn. Many also are interested because critics of the project have raised questions about the safety of the plutonium fuel being flown on board and whether there's an unacceptable danger of launching that from our soil here in Brevard County. Many facets of this debate were covered in detail Sunday in an 8-page special section produced by Florida Today staff members. Brevard Community College and Florida Tech also are helping disseminate information about this project through taping the program tonight. BCC will replay the program on the college's cable television station, and WFIT will tape the program for a replay on radio. We believe this exposure, combined with tonight's forum and coverage by Florida Today, will give all sides in the debate a great opportunity to share their views with the public. To help us this evening, we have a distinguished panel on both sides of the issue. I don't think I have the right order here of what I've in front of me, so I'm going to have to take note of them before I actually say who they are. On the far end, we have Lieutenant Colonel Everett Thomas, Commander, the 5th Space Launch Squadron of the U.S. Air Force. The 5th Space Launch Squadron manages the Titan IV rocket that will launch Cassini. Richard Spahalski is currently the program manager for the Cassini mission. He will discuss NASA's goals for the mission and safety precautions that are being taken. Beverly Cook is manager of the Space Nuclear Power Group of the U.S. Department of Energy. The power group is responsible for the development and testing of the plutonium fuel generators that are aboard the spacecraft. Mary Beth Sullivan with the Florida Coalition for Peace and Justice, and next to me, Bruce Gagnon, coordinator of the Coalition for Peace and Justice, will be sharing views of anti-Cassini activists who believe NASA is downplaying the possibility of an accident. I skipped over Bob Lay. He's sort of in the middle, literally on this, I think. He's the Brevard County Emergency Management Office Director, and he's responsible for making sure that if something does go wrong, that the government agencies are responding to it. And he will explain what they plan to do in the event of something going wrong. The guidelines we will follow tonight are these. The panelists from NASA, Air Force, and the Department of Energy will have a total of 15 minutes to explain the mission and the safeguards they have taken. Those opposing the mission will have 15 minutes to explain their opposition. Mr. Lay will have 5 minutes to give an overview of what his team plans to do. I will warn each group when they have 2 minutes remaining in their 15, and we will stop even if the speakers are not finished. After the panelists make their presentation, they will answer questions from the audience. When audience members arrive tonight, we hope you found in your chair or were given at the door a card. If you want to look in the stack of things you have to find that, we would like for you to write your questions that you have for the panel on that card. You can start turning those questions in now, but you can also turn them in during the program. If something they say up here prompts a question, feel free to write the question and send it to the front. You can pass the card to a Florida Today staff member. These are the people with the name tags on. Or we will have 2 editors, Pam Platt and John Glish, stationed at the front, although I see they didn't get their chairs. Are you going to get a position up here, John? Pam? You can get them to any way you can to them, and we're going to go through the questions and make sure we have a good selection as far as variety, and then we will call the person who submitted the question forward to one of the mics that we have on either side to ask the question. We'd ask that you identify yourself and then you might need to provide some small context about your question and direct it to a specific panel member, but please keep asking the question to 30 seconds. Question?
This is a fair forum. Why can't we ask our own questions?
You can.
Why do they have to be reviewed by the
We are going to, we have debated, we have thought this over a long time. We've dealt with a lot of forums like this, and we find that there is a limited amount of time for people. There's a limited amount of time. We have to finish here at 9 o'clock tonight, and so we want to get as many questions answered as possible, and so that's why we're doing it in this format. We have the.
What you're saying is not a really open forum.
The people on the panel all agreed to this, and I think that it's appropriate to follow that scenario.
What they're concerned about is other than the people on the panel.
Generally, I'll give the opposing side a chance to respond to an answer if it appears that something has been said that needs responding to, or if they indicate an interest. I may also inject a follow-up question at times. If a panelist does not feel qualified to answer a specific question, the person will be able to call on people not on the panel to provide specific knowledge or technical help. We want to get in as many questions as possible, but we will end the program at 9 o'clock. With that background, I'd like to open the program with a presentation from NASA.
Thank you, Bob. Cassini program welcomes this opportunity to directly deal with questions and answers on the safety of Cassini with the community from Brevard County and local towns. I will be very brief in my remarks since I'm sure most of the conversation will deal with the nuclear issue, and Bev Cook will cover the safeguards associated with that. I'd like to start with a couple charts on the overall management and structure of the mission. You see the chart on the right. Cassini is a large international project. It involves contribution and participation by 17 nations, including the United States. The European Space Agency is the largest single group of European space nations. The Italian Space Agency is also a large contributor, and other nations in Europe participate through their contribution through major science investigations. The next chart shows Saturn. It's a picture of Saturn taken from Voyager, and it's superposed on the Earth-Moon system to scale. So you're looking at a picture of Saturn to get an idea of the size, the scale of Saturn relative to a more familiar measurement. The Earth is on the left, the Moon is on the right. The distance between the two is almost entirely filled by the object in the visible rings. Titan, which is a major area investigation of Cassini, is at 10 Saturn diameters away from the center. So it would be somewhere near the wall on my right or behind me. And the satellite that's furthest from Saturn, the center of Saturn, is 200 or 100 Saturn radii from the center, which would be out somewhere in the entry area or the maybe outside the building. So it's a huge system relative to the size of things that we consider in our more familiar space objects. My last chart is a picture of Cassini as it is being prepared for launch. It is completed there, ready to move to the pad. It consists of a large propulsion module, 12 instruments, the Huygens probe, which is a contribution from the European Space Agency, and the large wide antenna at the top is a major contribution from the Italian Space Agency. Weighs in a little over 12,000 pounds. It stands 2.5 stories tall, and it's roughly 50% propellants to get into orbit about Saturn and do navigation throughout the system of Saturn and getting from here to Saturn. So with that, I'd like to turn the mic over to Beverly Cook from the Department of Energy, who will describe the RTG power source for this system and its method of protection.
Thank you. I'll try to do this quickly, but what I want to do is describe to you what a radioisotope thermoelectric generator is and what the history behind them is and what our basis is for safety, and do that quickly and so we can get on to questions that you have. Radioisotope thermoelectric generators have been used by the United States for 37 years, the first launch being in 1961 of a Transit 4A satellite. In fact, they've been used on 23 prior missions. And as probably most of you in this room know, on missions like the Voyager missions and the Pioneer missions, on the seismic stations on the Moon, on the Mars, the Viking landers on Mars. These are all systems that use RTGs. RTGs are used when you are in a situation that you can no longer do it with other methods of generating electrical power, either too far from the sun or in a very, very harsh environment. One of the big advantages of RTGs is, in fact, there are no moving parts. There's nothing to wear out. The Voyager RTGs have been operating for 20 years and are expected to go for another 25 years. They are very reliable systems. The way they work is you have a plutonium-238 dioxide fuel, and the characteristics of it that is useful is the fact that it generates heat. It generates a lot of heat, and we directly convert that heat to electricity. If you take a piece of metal and you put one end at a hot spot and one end at a cold spot, you'll get electric current going through that metal. An RTG has 572 what are called unicouples lined up around the outside. The hot end is next to the fuel, the cold end is next to space. There's an electric current generated. You hook them all up, you get 300 watts of electricity. I want to show you what the piece parts look like so you have an idea. The plutonium dioxide fuel pellets look like this. Okay? This is a model of one, and it's encapsulated in a metal called iridium. Iridium is a very high temperature metal, and it's used to encapsulate this pellet. Now, the surface temperature, if this was real, I wouldn't be holding it. The surface temperature of this pellet sitting here on this table in air would be 662 degrees Fahrenheit. So when I said it, they generate a lot of heat. It's a lot of heat. So that's the temperature. So the materials we have to use have to be very high temperature materials. These pellets are put in this cylinder, which is called a graphite impact shell. This graphite impact shell is made of the same kind of materials that you use on nose cones for missiles. You put 2 pellets in. Whoa. Okay, gotta get it settled down in. The fellows that assemble these, like I said, this is very hot. You have to handle it with remote materials. The temperature is the problem. Goes inside the graphite impact shell, or GIZ is what you see on some of the things. This is a graphite impact shell. This then goes inside of a thermal barrier, which is another piece of graphite that goes around that. So that's the next layer. This whole thing then goes inside an overall module. This module is also made out of the same materials that you use on nose cones and reentry vehicles. It slides inside of this. Cap goes on this, and actually you slide 2 of them in. This is a cutaway of it so you can see how it looks inside. But when you end up with a module like this. Okay. You stack up 18 of these modules, and that's called the heat source. If you could put up the first chart that I have there that shows the overall RTG design. It's about 4 feet long. The surface temperature of one of these modules in air is 500 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's the first thing. If there's an accident on launch and these modules come down, they're going to be sitting around, and we're going to go pick them up, but you're going to need tongs to pick them up. They're 500 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's one of the ways you find them, from thermal imaging. The radiation field's very low, but the heat is very high. You stack up 18 of them, you put them in this outside container that you see, and that's where the thermoelectrics are that convert the heat to electricity. That's how an RTG works. This is the safety basis. Let me show you one other thing, and that is, I'll show you a cutaway of something else that we use, and they're called radioisotope heater units. They're this size. You can see it has several layers. Inside of it is a very small plutonium pellet, again encapsulated in a high-temperature metal, which is extremely small. This overall unit generates 1 watt of heat. Doesn't convert anything to electricity. It's just 1 watt of heat. We have 117 of these on the spacecraft to keep the instruments warm. There were 3 of these on the Mars Pathfinder rover in the axle to keep the instruments on Pathfinder going, or that rover wouldn't have lasted through the first night. Our basis for understanding this is that we've taken this overall block, we've taken the piece parts, we've put them through explosions, we've put them through impacts, we've put them next to not just this overall block, but all the piece parts inside next to solid rocket fuel and burn them. The solid rocket motor test, we've burned next to the piece parts for as long as 10.5 minutes. The longest you can get a piece of solid rocket motor from the thickness that you have in the Cassini spacecraft is only 5 minutes. We've done overpressure tests up to 2,200 pounds per square inch. The highest overpressure we can get on Cassini is 120 pounds per square inch. The bottom line is this. We've tested this to the conditions that we will have if there is an accident on Cassini, because the RTGs that we use on space missions have to be designed to withstand accidents. That is our design requirement. That is not something that we just count on accidents not happening. We have to design it there. We do our analysis, we do our testing. Many of these materials have been tested for over 20 years. We've had improvements based on improvements of graphitic materials. Our analysis then has to be completely documented and has to be reviewed by outside organizations, independent of our agencies, independent of the program. That review has to be documented. All of that's available in public reading rooms. All of the testing information is available also. And all of that then has to go to the White House through the Office of Science and Technology Policy. All of it has to be documented, and all of it has to be reviewed. With that, I would like to go to Colonel Thomas to talk a little bit about the rocket.
Good evening. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Ed Thomas. I'm the launch director for this mission, and my job, in addition to watching over the programming, planning, and processing of the Titan 4B, and this is a model of it, I am inherently responsible for safety, security, and resource protection while we're processing this rocket. This rocket was chosen because it is America's most heavy lift rocket, and currently it's the safest Titan flying. Now, many of you might remember just the Titan core here was the basic of the Gemini program. We launched 10 Gemini missions on this, so we put man above on this, man in the space on this core. Now, the overall features, the solid rocket motor upgrades, this is a little different from the Titan 4As that we've flown, and you can see by this model, this divided into 3 sections versus the 7, a safety feature that has been designed. We spent 10 years qualifying these boosters, and I think they're the safest that are flying today. In fact, this rocket meets all the safety features that we at the range at Patrick Air Force Base have designed into it. The spacecraft will rest just above here on what we call an upper stage called a Centaur. The Centaur will be used to take it out into, she distracted me. I'm sorry. The Centaur will push it out into orbit so when it releases it can fly on its mission toward Saturn. This is nothing more than a payload fairing, and it protects the rocket as it flies about 3.5 minutes into space, and then it falls off. But as I said, my job is to watch over the overall processing of this rocket. I'm responsible for safety, security, and resource protection.
Room to spare. Okay, we'll move on to the opponents, Mr. Gagnon and Ms. Sullivan.
Hi, I think I'll begin. My name is Mary Beth Sullivan. I'm a social worker, and I've been involved with the coalition on this issue for a few years now. I'd like to start with the first overhead, please, Louise. This is a quote from Dr. Cook, Dr. Beverly Cook. If there's an explosion in the launch, there are absolutely no conditions that will result in the release of plutonium in the air. This is what we heard on Fox Television on the 9th of September. The next overhead, however, tells a different story. This statement actually comes from NASA's environmental impact statement. I'm sorry, it's the next one, yes. Okay, here's the statement. Let me just outline the elements that we think are important here. Following an accident, exposure could result from inhalation of respirable particles of plutonium dioxide in the immediate vicinity of the accident. Moving down a few lines. These small particles or vapor could also present an exposure hazard downwind of the accident when the radioactively contaminated plume passes. This is a concern for both Phase 1 launch pad accidents and Phases 5 and 6, and Earth swing-by accidents where GPHS modules could impact rock. Okay, so this seems to be contradicting what Dr. Cook told us on television just the other day. I want to, you can turn the overhead off for a moment, Louise, because I want to read, Dr. Michio Kaku couldn't be with us today. He's from New York. He's the nuclear physicist who's been helping us out by examining NASA's information. So one of the things, I want to read from him what he has to say about a launch accident. NASA has tested the RTGs to 2,000 pounds per square inch over pressure, and the RTGs survived intact. They have heated it up to 2,200 degrees centigrade, and they survived. they were conveniently 60 degrees below the melting point of iridium. They fired titanium and aluminum bullets, and they pierced the RTGs at 1,000 feet per second. Shrapnel, as simulated by the bullets, will rip the plutonium to shreds by their own admission. Local heating can exceed 2,200 degrees centigrade, causing the iridium to melt or at least get soft. A combination of all three, high temperatures, shrapnel, high pressure, will probably blow everything to bits. But NASA has never performed the acid test, putting all three factors together at the same time. In other words, no one knows what will happen in a launch accident. It's purely conjectural what will happen, since NASA has only tested each factor separately, not together. Now, some of you are sitting with an article from Florida Today that was written back in 1995. At that time, Dr. Cook agrees. I want to read a quote at the bottom that says, "Critics question NASA's safety test." There's a quote from Dr. Cook in that. "It's true that NASA and DOE do not simulate the whole accident at once," says Dr. Cook, a Department of Energy physicist. "Instead, segments of an accident are simulated one at a time. For example, one series of tests looks at an explosion and another series looks at flying fragments. Then the tests are analyzed sequentially and risks calculated." So our argument is clear. We're not really sure what would happen to the RTGs on a launch accident that had multiple event failures. The next overhead looks at, again, another page from this same environmental impact study. I'm sorry that it can't be read. I apologize. But what it is, NASA has indicated that, well, if indeed there is a problem at launch, in the worst case scenario, would have to do some cleanup. So let me just sort of indicate that what NASA's report indicates what would happen if plutonium rain came down in an urban area. The first thing that would have to happen is a location and removal of any detectable particles. Okay, now if it comes down as vapor, I'm not sure how much is going to be detected. Remove and dispose all vegetation. That's the next step. Third, impose land use restrictions, demolish some or all structures, and relocate affected population permanently. Now, in an agricultural area, future agricultural land use would be banned if, in the worst case scenario, plutonium, the RTG did not satisfy the multiple event failure test. The next one, please. Now, we haven't talked yet about the flyby. NASA hasn't quite explained the fact that on the way to Saturn, we're going to, the ship Cassini will go around Venus, come back to Earth, orbit Earth once to get the velocity needed to go on to make it out to Saturn. When it comes back, it's called a swing by. It'll come back at a speed of something like 42,000 miles an hour, and it's expected to orbit about 412 miles above the Earth, I believe. At that time, if there's a small misfire and the ship enters the Earth's atmosphere, NASA's report says this, I'll quote, I'm sorry you can't read it, it's sort of underlined down in the third paragraph. "In the unlikely event that an inadvertent re-entry occurred, approximately 5 billion of the estimated 7 to 8 billion world population at the time of the swing-bys could receive 99% or more of the radiation exposure." Now, just so you know, I mean, Dr. Cook sort of showed us these shells here, the canisters that will hold the plutonium. If it re-enters the Earth's atmosphere at that point, my understanding is that the RTG, there are 3 of them, each of them contain 18 canisters. My understanding is that RTG will rip apart so that those canisters actually fall independently. So now we have 54 canisters falling onto the Earth. Now, okay. Thanks. Should I do this one? Yeah. Okay. Let me just talk a little bit about the solar option. There should be another, the next, thank you, Louise. This page up on the screen comes from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. It was written in 1981. The Galileo mission, before it was sent up, the Jet Propulsion Lab was asked to do an analysis as to whether a solar option existed for deep space probes. Their finding: based on the current study, it appears that a Galileo Jupiter orbiting mission could be performed with a concentrated photovoltaic solar array power source without changing the mission sequence or impacting science objectives. This was done on paper. They said it could be done. The next overhead shows that 13 years later, 1994, the European Space Agency came out with a press release that says they indeed have cracked the nut. The solar technology exists for deep space probes. And they're actually using solar technology on their ship called Rosetta, which will go to do some comet explorations. Beyond Jupiter. Thank you. Gerhard Strobel, we met him in the spring. The European Space Agency contracted out to DASA, the Deutsche Aerospace Agency, and an Italian agency to do this research on the solar technology. We talked to him in the spring. He assured us that it could be done. On June 23rd on German television, he did the same. It would mean a redesign of the spacecraft, but it could happen. Could you just do the next overhead, please? I need to end up quickly here. There's a physicist from the European Space Agency, Carla Signorini. She says, and it was reported in the May 21st article that you have from Florida Today, sorry, if given the money to do the work within 5 years, the European Space Agency could have solar cells ready to power a space mission to Saturn. Thank you.
Okay. I'm gonna try to quickly go through and finish up the rest of the time. It's not just Cassini that we're talking about. In fact, the Department of Energy has released a document that you see over here on the overhead that has a dozen other nuclear missions between now and the year 2009. And we believe if you allow successive launches from Cape Canaveral over and over again with nuclear materials, when you have rockets with a 10 to 20% failure rate, it's only a matter of time before there will be an accident. Next, please. Recently, there was a book written. If you'd hold your applause, you're eating up my time, and they don't give me much time here. Recently, this book was written by a NASA scientist. It's called Mining the Sky: Untold Riches from the Asteroids, Comets, and Planets. In this book, they outline that the real agenda of the space program is to go out, much like Columbus, and look for the new world and the new riches. And in here, in this book, over and over and over again, they talk about nuclear power. Ms. Cook mentioned that there was plutonium on the Pathfinder that landed on July 4th. There's plutonium on Cassini. They're talking about nuclear-powered mining colonies on Mars in the year 2007, launched from Cape Canaveral, 2 nuclear reactors. And they're talking about nuclear-powered mining colonies throughout the universe, on the moon, and other bodies as well. What we're seeing now is a conjunction of interests. Recently, last January, there was a national conference of the space propulsion people in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And there was a workshop by people from Brookhaven Labs, which is a Department of Energy laboratory on Long Island, New York. And their particular workshop was about using space as a nuclear waste disposal plan. And they were talking about launching nuclear waste. We have over 90,000 tons between the United States and Russia, launching it into space. So we have the labs that have been building bombs for years. They're now looking for something else to do. 4 different Department of Energy laboratories helped fabricate Cassini. At Los Alamos, there were 244 cases of worker contamination reported between 1993 and 1995 as they were fabricating the generators. But the labs are pushing plutonium into space. You have nuclear academia at the University of Florida, where I live in Gainesville. The nuclear engineering department is now working with Los Alamos on a nuclear rocket with nuclear reactor engines. And so nuclear academia is also pushing nuclear power into space. You have the corporate interest, Lockheed Martin, and then you have the Air Force that is over and over again saying they want to have nuclear power in space for Star Wars weapon systems. We believe that there is needed, and we welcome tonight's opportunity to have a national, international debate. I will tell you that there are now over 400 active organizers working on this, working on local campaigns all over the world. Just a couple days ago in Sydney, Australia, there was a full-page newspaper story. There are active protests going on throughout Europe and other parts of the world. And throughout the United States, there are demonstrations planned in New York, Washington, Seattle, San Francisco, St. Louis, and here at Cape Canaveral on October 4th. We've been called ignorant and hysterical by, in fact, Mr. Sapolsky in that very Florida Today article that you have in your lap. But I'll tell you what, folks, in this country, that's what democracy is supposed to be all about. The taxpayers are asked to pay for this with your money, and if there's ever an accident, you're asked to suffer the risks. So we believe that it's an outrage to tell us essentially to shut up and go home because you, the citizens, don't know what you're talking about. Leave it to us scientists. We think it's the height of arrogance and elitism for scientists to talk that way. In case of an accident, can I have the next one, please? In case of an accident, not that one, go to the Department of Energy monitoring one. In case of an accident, the Department of Energy says that they will send in radiological teams, and this particular quote is from an article all the way back to '89 at the time of the launch of the Galileo. The underlined quote, you can't see it, but says, if there's an accident, we'll stay as long as we're needed, maybe forever. The point
2 minutes.
Okay. The last 2-3 days ago in Las Vegas, in the newspaper in Las Vegas, there was a story about Department of Energy radiological teams that were going to be flown in to monitor this particular launch at Cape Canaveral. They've been training radiological teams up at Savannah River Plant in Aiken, South Carolina. And so the fact is, despite all the assurances and all the claims that these RTGs are indestructible, NASA knows that they're not, and then they know there could be an accident, and they're preparing to deal with one if there is. So I would suggest to you that NASA is in for a fall if they continue to use nuclear power. Not only will the people of Brevard be affected, the people of Florida would be affected, the people worldwide could be affected. Just last November, you might have heard of the Russian Mars probe with 1/2 pound of plutonium, fell back to Earth, burned up on reentry, and there were eyewitnesses. One of them, a former NASA employee, and his wife were in the mountains of Chile and Bolivia stargazing. They saw the burning reentry over Chile. Last week, Chilean national television called my office and wanted to talk to me about this. I said, why are you calling? They said, for us, this is a real and an imaginable thing. We know that this stuff can go wrong. I would suggest to you that you discount the people opposing this at your own peril, NASA and Department of Energy, that if you ever have an accident, the jobs that you have in this community will be lost. The people of the world will be in outrage. People all over the world are indeed watching. They're angry, and they're organizing to stop nuclear power in space. Saturn isn't going anywhere. We're not opposed to space exploration. We just think it must be done properly. We think that there's an effort to try to build a new market into space for nuclear power, and that's what's really going on here, folks. We must stop it. Make them go with solar. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go to Mr. Lay next, and for 5 minutes, I did want to sort of stay ahead of the game and notify the persons that are going to be asking their question ahead of time so they can get to the mic so we won't have to be walking back and forth in the middle of killing time. But Larry Reed is going to be the first questioner after Mr. Lay speaks.
I'm Bob Lay, and I'm the Director of Emergency Management for Brevard County.
Can you speak up, please?
Can you hear me now? Is that better? Okay. I'm Bob Lay. I'm the Director of Emergency Management for Brevard County. And what I'd like to do is give you a brief synopsis of the planning that's been taking place for the Cassini launch. Before I do that, I want to tell you a little bit about the kind of planning we do every day. We're organized under the Florida statutes, and in the Florida statutes, we're required to do comprehensive planning for all emergencies. That's natural emergencies, natural disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, anything that's natural. We also have a responsibility to do contingency planning for technological hazards and emergencies. That's chemical spills from water treatment plants, releases, any type chemical releases. We also have to be concerned with nuclear power plant. The reason for that is we have a nuclear power plant 50 miles south of us. So we're in an ingestion pathway for a nuclear power plant. So we have to do radiological contingency planning within the county. There's another reason we do that, and that's also because the state of Florida has a plan called a Radiological Emergency Preparedness Plan, and that plan requires us to do contingency planning, again, for the nuclear power plants, and also because we launch vehicles from here that could carry radioisotope thermoelectric generators. So we do contingency planning for that. So I wanted you to know that this is not something brand new to us. It is something that we have been doing. We started the planning for this Cassini launch well over 2 years ago. Now, before any launch like this can take place, it's very important, and I think everybody would recognize this, there's something that has to be done, and it's called an environmental assessment. And that environmental assessment, in this case, I think, goes directly into an environmental impact statement. And that came out in 1995, and that's the first time we really have the opportunity to start looking, and that's the final draft of the environmental impact statement. First time we had to look at all the data, the figures that came out in that study. Since then, there's been a supplement that's come out. There's also been, as part of this process, citizens have the opportunity to comment in those public forum as part of that process. Now, part of that we have looked at, and there's a final things come out called the final safety analysis. We've also reviewed that, and we have been part of. That's been part of our contingency planning, is to review that and provide any input if we have major concerns in this area. Now, part of our contingency planning has been to work with NASA, with the Air Force, with Department of Energy, with local agencies, with the State Bureau of Radiation Control, with the State Division of Emergency Management, and to go through all types of contingencies. For over 2 years now, we've been meeting, discussing these things, making sure that all the agencies involved have an understanding of what's required and what could possibly happen during these types of launches. Now, as we talk tonight, we know that there are launches that take place in this county all the time.
You have 2 minutes.
Okay. Since February of this year, we've had located in the Range Operations Center, in their Toxic Control Center, we've had a hazard material specialist whose prime job is to be in that center to help provide information to us in our Emergency Operations Center in case something happens during any launch. We also have purchased an emergency alerting system so that we can immediately notify radio stations, local radio stations, and Orlando TV stations in the event we need to get emergency information out. We can do this very rapidly. We particularly are concerned about getting that kind of information out even if there is a perception that there could be something wrong. Now, what I'm telling you now in terms of, also in our phone books, on page 24, 25, 26, we've included information on what to do for all type hazards and emergencies within the county, to include hazard release of materials. Now, this is all in place and really has nothing to do with the launch of the Cassini. This is all in place and has been in place for some time. The last thing I'd like to tell you is that we have spent time looking at what's happening in terms of the receipt, the storage of the RTGs. That's been shared with us. It's been, I think, a really good relationship between our office within the county, with the Air Force, and with NASA, and with any of those other agencies and folks that have an interest within the communities. We do have, and we are currently working up the exact scripting that we're going to be using in the event that something happens, but everybody needs to know that if anything happens, people need to be informed about what has happened immediately. Just because you see a cloud.
Mr. Lay, your time's up. Thanks. Our first question, I believe, identified, is it Mr. Reed? Is that the name? Just if it would be possible to state where you're from and your name and when you ask your question, and keep them to 30 seconds, please.
My name is Larry Reed.
Let me put one other thing out. The next questioner after this is answered will be George Rosenfield. If you could come on up to the mic, it would probably help.
And I'm a resident of Brevard County, and I'm going to keep it short and sweet, and I defy anybody. First of all, I'd like to say that I think that it's interesting that this is supposed to be a public forum, and yet it's held in a private building, so that's interesting that they can just escort us out whenever they just feel like that our questions aren't appropriate. But in any case, I defy anybody up on this panel, including the people for it, because, you know, this is the crux of the issue, to give me an answer to this question, is what gives anybody, including the federal government, the right to risk the population's death or injury just for space exploration? What gives them the right to volunteer us as a public, to volunteer us without our consent to risking our lives?
Thank you. Pardon? Were you directing that at one individual, or should I select someone?
Anybody.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'd like to take a start at answering that, and the other panelists can join in or follow up. Personally, I don't consider it a question of rights. To me, it's a question of safety, and the onus upon us is to demonstrate that it's safe. If you look at what goes on in everyday life, anytime one of us gets in a car, we put other people at risk. And
let him give his answer to the question, please. Let him give his answer to the question. Someone on the other side will have a chance to respond briefly after that.
now, when you put someone at risk and it's involuntary, you are required to follow certain laws and regulations to comply with. That's what you do when you drive your car. That's what you do but it's not the choice of the person who is out there that may be threatened by your actions in that vehicle.
Let him answer the question.
So in this nuclear issue that we're dealing with, we are required by federal regulations to go through certain processes that Beverly Cook described here. We are required by presidential directive to follow the process for independent review and ultimate review by the Office of Science and Technology and the policy, and perhaps decision by the president. And we are required to follow the policies set down by international agreements between our governments and other governments via the United Nations and other ways. So this is a matter of dealing with your subject under the regulations that control it.
Mr. Gagnon, would you care to respond to that?
Okay. First of all, I would urge everyone in the audience, no matter which side you're on, I wouldn't want to be interrupted either. I'm sure he wouldn't. I'm sure he wouldn't either. So I urge everyone just to hang on to your emotion until you get your own chance to talk. I would like to say that I think what we're facing in today's world, unfortunately, is that technology is beginning to outpace ethics and morality and even democracy. And I think this question that this man asked is a very important question, and it's the one that I hear. I go speaking all over the place. I'm doing radio interviews all the time, and people call in and they always ask this question: who gives them the right to put us at risk? You know, if we do get in the car, sir, it is a voluntary risk. If we jump from an airplane, that's a voluntary risk. But to begin launching plutonium, and there is nothing that is fail-safe in this world. There's a woman in Brevard County that sent me something that I'd like to read to you. It's very short. It's a quote written in 1912, spoken in 1912, by Captain E.I. Smith. See if you can figure out what he's talking about. I cannot imagine any condition which could cause this ship to founder. I cannot conceive of any vital disaster happening to the vessel. Modern shipbuilding has gone beyond that. Of course, they're talking about the Titanic. That everyone said the Titanic was indestructible. We were told that the chance of a Challenger explosion was 1 in 100,000. And afterwards, the number was changed to 1 in 76. And now today, we're told that plutonium generators are indestructible. The fact is, there's nothing on this earth made by human beings that is indestructible.
Thank you. Mr. Rosenfeld, please state your name and where you live.
My name is George Rosenfeld. I live in Melbourne. I'm a research physical scientist, and I'm retired from a federal government agency dealing with in a scientific organization. And most of my work dealt with the environment, specifically with environmental studies on Earth as measured from space. Prior to that, I was a photogrammetrist here at the missile range during the 50s and 60s. I find it a little my question was to be about environmental impact statements, because the agency I was involved with, retired from the U.S. Geological Survey, was quite involved over the number of years I was with them in developing environmental impact statements. In fact, the EIS organization was part of the...
Your question is, we're going to need to get to that.
So my question is, I find it has already been answered. I was calling for an environmental impact statement because nothing I'd read in the papers in the last month or so ever mentioned an environmental impact statement. And
so you want to know if one was...
And I find out tonight here, and it's a little disconcerting that one has been done and that there were public hearings, because environmental impact statement law calls for public hearings.
I don't believe there ever were public hearings.
Who would you like to direct that question to?
That was to Mr. Spihalski.
Okay.
And was the science documented? Was the science cited?
Thank you.
And was the science peer reviewed? If it has been such, that information should be made public.
Well, the environmental impact process is one of the federal regulations that we are required to abide by. And yes, there was a preliminary environmental impact statement. It was set out for public review. It was sent out to all the normal environmental groups that participate in that. I think the Florida Coalition people participated sent in comments. We got comments from the Sierra Club. Many environmental groups throughout the country, universities and so forth. Each one of those comments was responded to in the final environmental impact statement, and then earlier this year a supplement was also generated and went through a similar process.
The supplement, let me add, the supplement then was based on the final safety analysis report that was completed. These were all available in the NASA reading rooms also, plus sent to anyone who asked for them. And the final safety analysis report is the basis for the numbers that are in the final supplement to the EIS. And yes, every bit of this information was peer reviewed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If I can add...
But before you start, I'd let you do that, but I need to just notify Rob Osband, who's the next questioner. Go ahead.
In fact, there were public comments. There were a ton of public comments in the back of this, including our organization, but I do want to clarify there were never any public hearings about this. And what's been interesting is that there was a draft, and then this is the final environmental impact statement, and then supplemental environmental impact statements came after that. And with every one, the numbers began to change downward. In the case of the flyby, for example, first they said 2,300 people could die over a 50-year period of time. And then the supplemental environmental impact statement, NASA changed that number to 120. So the numbers, as political pressure mounted and as attention was focused on this document, the numbers began to change downward.
Or as the analysis was completed.
Dr. Michio Kaku, I think you all should have on your seat. He has his own analysis of this that he was asked to do by 60 Minutes. And so I would invite you to read that on your own time.
Thanks. Mr. Osband.
My name is Rob Osband. I'm from Titusville, and I have a question for Mr. Gagnon. I've read reports where you claim that the use of nuclear materials in space, particularly on Cassini, is part of a major plot. I'm wondering what, besides the books written for the public, what evidence you have for this. Are there published papers before scientific committees on this sort of thing?
Well, actually, I've never used the word plot. That's the word that the media, including the Florida Today, have used to describe our contention that the Air Force is, first of all, wants nuclear power in space, and secondly, that missions like Cassini become icebreakers as a way to get everybody used to the idea of launching nuclear power into space. If I could take a minute, if we can have that vision for 2020, please.
Randy Brown, who'll be the next questioner, and then followed by Louise Mills.
The Air Force U.S. Space Command has a brochure called Vision for 2020 that was just recently published. They're headquartered in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Next one, control of space. And inside of here, they have a section called Control of Space. This is Vision for 2020 is their view, their overview, their agenda for the next years in space. In here they say control of space is the ability to assure freedom of access, assure access to space, freedom of operations within the space medium, and an ability to deny others the use of space if required. The control of space will encompass protecting U.S. military, civil, and commercial investments in space. There's another document that is called New World Vistas, a 15-volume U.S. Air Force report, Air and Space Power for the 21st Century, published last year in 1996 by the Air Force. And in it they say the following: in the next 2 decades, new technologies will allow the fielding of space-based weapons of devastating effectiveness to be used to deliver energy and mass at force projection in tactical and strategic conflict. All current spacecraft are either power limited or restricted in some measure by inadequate electric power. Power limitations impose restrictions on the communications and propulsion subsystems and currently make large space-based radar and space-based weapons relatively unfeasible. A revolutionary change in capabilities will result from power technologies capable of providing large amounts of power on board satellites. A natural technology to enable high power is nuclear power in space, concludes the New World Vistas in its space technology volume. In fact, the United States Air Force over and over again, if you begin to look at it, is calling for the use of nuclear power in space. And what we're submitting to you is that they can't just tomorrow come out and say, folks, we're going to start launching nuclear power from Cape Canaveral to take military control of space, that in fact they have to get everybody used to the idea. They hope after a few more years of us coming out and protesting this and the media getting tired, oh, there they go again, that kind of thing, that they will have established it in space. It is true they've been using it since 1960s. There have been 3 accidents that the United States has had with nuclear power. The Russians have had about 6. So this stuff is being established in space. There's no doubt about it, and there's no doubt about it at all. I'd be happy to share any of this information with people that would like to see it following this event. Also in this particular Air Force document called Guardians of the High Frontier, they display their patch on their uniform in Colorado Springs at the U.S. Space Command. And we've always found it very interesting and think it's important for people to know that the patch on the uniform at the U.S. Space Command reads Master of Space. Well, this is really upsetting people around the world because what they're hearing is that the United States Air Force intends to become master of space, to take military control of space, to say that we own space, that we are going to dominate space. And if you will, it's much like Columbus. After Columbus sailed the 7 seas with Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria and discovered gold and all those other things and land in the New World, the first thing that Queen Isabella did was to send in the Spanish Armada. What we now face in today's world as we begin mining the sky for untold riches from the asteroid, comets, and planets, the U.S. Space Command says they're going to go in to control space to ensure, and I'll read this to you one more time, to ensure that the control of space will encompass protecting U.S. military, civil, and commercial assets in space. So what we're creating is a military, nuclear-based armada to take military control of space. That's not a plot, ladies and gentlemen. That's reality. It's written down. It's in their own words. We're not making it up. Thank you.
I need to... Yes, you can respond to any part of that you want to.
First, since Mr. Gagnon took the opportunity to clarify the use of the word plot, I'd like to clarify the quote he attributed to me. I don't recall ever using the term hysterical or ignorant in discussing the activists in this matter at all. So if that appeared in Florida today, I didn't see it when I read the document, and I can't remember ever saying.
Well, sir, in fact, we've been getting...
Can we just stick to the question?
So,
and you might need to move forward with your mic there. I don't think you're quite getting enough pickup on it.
There was a lot of reports of the Air Force mentioned in Mr. Gagnon's comments. I didn't see anything or hear anything there that talked directly to the Cassini mission. And I failed to see any connection between what was said there and what Cassini is doing in a purely science mission to gather data from the outer planets. So,
and let me just add, the Atomic Energy Act says that any nuclear systems have to go through, was the AEC and now the Department of Energy, and my office does all space nuclear, and I have no orders from anybody, or no systems being built, and we have absolutely no program ongoing for space reactors. So lots of people write lots of plans. This is not in the works.
Can you tell us what the TOPAZ is?
The TOPAZ is a canceled program. It's absolutely zero funding. There's nothing being done. And they tested out technologies with no fuel. And the other thing I want to show you is he said, yes, there's been accidents. Let me show you what we talk about accidents. This is a photograph I didn't show earlier. In fact, there was an accident in '64. The design was such at that time that there was an accident, it re-entered, and it did disperse in the upper atmosphere because that's what the design at the time was to do. Right after that, they changed the design of RTGs. This is the Nimbus satellite. It was launched at Vandenberg. It was, they did a launch abort about 2 miles up. They blew up the rocket. The RTGs, the spacecraft, came in off the coast of California. It landed in the water. It sat under 300 feet of water for 5 months when they picked it up. Those are the containment design. At this time, that's this design. At that time, it was that design with, in fact, a graphite containment that was not as sturdy as this. Sat there for 5 months. No release of nuclear materials. This is what it's designed to do. We picked it up, we took it to a nuclear facility, we repackaged it in new graphite material, and we used it on the next launch. We have tested this in actual conditions. We've launched it, we've blown them up, they've come in, they re-entered as they were designed to.
I believe the next questioner is Randy Brown.
I'm Randy Brown. I'm from Orlando, Florida. This actually kind of relates to what you were just talking about. I was wondering if Mr. Gagnon could describe the mechanism by which you think plutonium in a breathable form, so it could actually hurt you, could be spread over a large Central Florida population during launch. And after you've done that briefly, get a brief response to that scenario.
Could people hear the question in the back? Could you repeat it just briefly, please?
Please describe
the closer to the mic, I think.
Please describe the mechanism by which you think plutonium in breathable form could be spread over a large Central Florida population during launch. And after you've described that scenario, I was hoping that somebody from the DOE or the JPL could respond to that scenario.
Well, you know, if you look at the Titan rocket that is going to launch Cassini, before we saw the model, and we were told that Cassini sits at the top of the Titan, and right below the Cassini is the Centaur upper stage rocket. The plutonium generators sit on the bottom of the Cassini rocket, at the very bottom. And directly underneath that is the Centaur upper stage rocket. And we believe that it's very possible that there could be an initial explosion of the Titan rockets, which would cause a secondary explosion of the Centaur rockets. And that kind of overpressures that would be created could possibly be enough to break these things open at launch. The kind of heat and the kind of fire and the flying bits all together creating the sort of overpressures that could blow this apart. Dr. Michio Kaku and others are saying basically nobody knows for sure because the tests, multi-event failure testing was never done. That in that Florida Today article that you have in your lap dated May of '95, Beverly Cook admits that they only do single event failure testing. They test for one thing at a time. But if they did do multi-event failure testing, which they've never done, we believe that it very well could blow it to bits and then release the plutonium into dust particles that could be carried throughout the community.
Yes.
I don't think that could happen. There's not been a Titan rocket that blew up the Centaur, and before we got to a stage like that, we have humans sitting on console watching computer data that will take action before something like that happens. There's no such thing as a Centaur blowing up like that. I'm not sure where you got that data.
However, I don't count on that, just to tell you that. In fact, tests have been done with Centaur explosions. We've done thorough testing at White Sands test facilities with the materials that are in the Centaur, with those explosions, measuring the overpressure from explosion of a Centaur. And we've looked at the overpressure that would be generated, and we looked at how that relates to the RTG piece parts. Now, when we say we've done separate tests, we've done tests so we make sure that we can characterize every piece part of it. You all know what a rocket looks like when it blows up. You get an explosion in the air. You get pieces flying out. You hit the ground. The high temperatures are at the ground when you hit the ground and you're next to the solid rocket materials. That's where you get high temperatures. So you don't get a high temperature and then an explosion. You get explosion, you get shrapnel, you get high temperatures. So what we do is, in fact, we test the overall block to explosion overpressures to see if we can strip off all the layers. We look at shrapnel and we shoot things at them. We look at high temperatures. For example, the kinds of, let me show you the picture of a pellet. One of the things we try to look at is, okay, what if something does happen and you strip over the outside? This is a pellet that we assumed that there was an overpressure. We stripped everything off, and then we impact it on a hard surface at terminal velocity. And what this coating around it does, it's a very ductile material. So this pellet smashes, and this coating bends with it, and it stays intact. When we talk release, what we mean is if it bends over, and you get a sharp edge of a pellet in there, you might get a slit. You get a slit in the pellet, it's inside this, it's inside this, it's inside this. And when we talk release, we're still talking inside of all these layers of containment. So we do sequential testing, and we do it so that we completely understand the characteristics of all these materials under all these sequences. And we also test the rockets and how they blow up and how they break up, so that we understand all of the threats on the RTGs.
Thank you. Is it possible? How does that compare to that launch you said where it crashed and they recovered it?
Louise Mills, next question.
Oh, very, very well.
Oh, about the same? Okay.
And following her, it will be Maria Whipple.
I had a question about the Titan IV. I went to your website dealing with the Cassini launch, and it said that basically it was a 1 in 1,400 chance that the rocket would blow up on launch. And from what I understand, there have been 20 launches, and one of them didn't make it. So I'm not a mathematician, but it seems to me there's like a 5% failure rate on the Titan IV. How do you address that?
Well, you know, 5% failure, 95% success.
Well, let me... It's the guy who runs the rockets. They don't like me talk about blowing up their rockets and spacecraft either, but let me tell you, that number does not say 1 in 1,400 of having a Titan failure. It says 1 in 1,400 of having an accident with a release. There are lots of accidents that have absolutely no effect on the RTGs whatsoever. That's the number of, that's the probability of having an accident that cracks open that first layer of containment. Doesn't even mean you distribute material anyplace. It's just that first layer of containment inside. That's what that number is. It says probability of release. 1 in a million chance is a probability of reentry on the swing by. The 1 in a million number? Do you want to talk to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that has a very long history behind it. We can talk to that.
Would you like to address it?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah, wait a second. Were you going a little further on that? I'm going to give Mr. Gagnon a response, but okay. Go ahead.
Okay, the 1 in a million number is a requirement that we place on the design of the spacecraft and the mission. And what that means is that we actually control the design of the hardware and the trajectory such that the probability of that accident occurring is smaller than that. One of the things we do to do that is as we approach Earth, the trajectory of the spacecraft is biased away from Earth, so no matter what would happen, it could never impact. And it is not until the last few days before we fly by Earth that the trajectory is brought in closer. And our ability to do that accurately has been demonstrated throughout many programs over the last 30 years, including all the flybys we've done of other planets as well as Earth. There's been 2 flybys of Earth by the Galileo spacecraft. And they were within a couple kilometers of their aiming point, and which was well within the requirement of 12 to 24 kilometers of accuracy. So the accuracy of our being able to do that is very well controlled. It's also demonstrated by our ability to navigate through the system of Jupiter and precisely fly by the satellites of Jupiter as we will at Saturn. We've done this at Venus, we've done it at Mercury, and we've done it at Earth. And so it's a process that is well understood and can be very tightly controlled.
It's not the third planetary flyby. Right.
Third Earth, right.
The other part of developing probabilities of things happening that are very, very small. What you look at is all of the piece parts and the probability of all the things that could cause that to happen. What's the failure rate of all the electronics? What's the failure rate of all the mechanical systems? And those all add in together. So you look at the failure rates of every component that's there, and that factors into what's the probability of a failure. This is how you do probabilities and risk assessment.
And I'd like to add one further footnote to that. Of our own initiative, we asked the NASA to get a separate body to review the way we do that, both in the design of the spacecraft and the design of the trajectory and the navigation process. And a team was put together that was headed by experts from MIT as well as other institutions throughout the country, both in universities and industry, and they agreed with our assessment.
Excuse me, we're going to have to give the...
I'd like to respond if I could. There's 2 points that were raised here. First, I'd like to get back to the RTG. Could you put that, the first one on, please? Of the Centaur and the Cassini. This is just a picture of the Cassini. And you see at the bottom of the Cassini, the RTG, and below that, the Centaur. I just want you to see that, how close they are. We're told that there won't be any kind of problem with the Centaur, but we're not so sure we believe that. All right, the next one. In 1989, we went into federal court in Washington to try to block the launch of Galileo. And NASA swore in a stack of Bibles that the RTGs were indestructible and that solar power wouldn't work. Earlier, Mary Beth read from a study done by Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena in 1981 that said solar would have worked on Galileo. We got that study from NASA under the Freedom of Information Act 2 weeks rather, after the launch of Galileo. Our request was 3 years old. We've been trying for 3 years to get those documents about alternatives and about RTG safety from NASA, but we didn't get them until 2 weeks after the launch. This is another document that we got under the FOIA 2 weeks after the launch. Go back to that one, please. It's a final analysis safety report for the Galileo mission prepared for the Department of Energy by General Electric, who made the RTG. Now to that other page. In here, it says the test resulted in complete destruction of the RTG at a static overpressure of 1,300 to 1,800 pounds per square inch. And then later on, it goes to say that the results were not used in the final safety evaluation. In fact, within this report, there were pictures of the RTGs being blown apart. Okay. The other thing I want to talk about is this flyby. We're told that not to worry about it, everything else. The fact is, about 2 weeks ago, I believe, from Cape Canaveral was launched a rocket called ACE, or a satellite called ACE, that has now been tumbling out of control for the last 2 weeks. And I believe that in the paper in the last couple of days, there was an article saying that it's either called Lewis or ACE, one or the other, right?
Wrong mission, wrong launch place.
Yeah, you're confusing a launch that happened not at Cape Canaveral.
Okay. It was launched from Vandenberg. Thank you very much. There's a rocket. There's a satellite.
And that was a civilian launch.
Excuse me. There's a satellite now tumbling out of control. And we're told that if NASA can't get it back together again in the next week or so, it's going to fall back to Earth. And we're told that it has something to do with sticking thrusters. I understand that as these satellites do flybys of the Earth, that they could have problems like sticking thrusters, computer failures, human errors from ground control, radio communication problems, or steering mechanism problems. The point is, no matter what it's called or where it was launched from, the operative point is that about 20%, I understand, of all spacecraft that are sent off have some kind of failures. And that when you've got plutonium on it coming whipping back in at 42,000 miles an hour, that the slightest malfunction or human error, which is not part of their calculations, how can you quantify human error? Then we have big trouble.
I believe I saw an indication you wanted to say something about one of those. No?
I'll go on solar, yeah. I got lost with where Mr. Gagnon was heading on the answer to that question. Let's talk about solar power a little bit. The report that he attributes to JPL was written. It was written by some of our people who do advanced studies and try to look at more advanced ways to implement these things. We will continue to push for ways to use solar power as far out in the solar system as we can. The trouble here is that the solar intensity at Saturn is 1% of what it is here on Earth. So the ability to capture enough energy to operate a spacecraft is impossible with solar power. If you look at the history of the space program, we've been flying solar panels since the program started in the early 60s and continue to fly solar panels. That's about 37 years of flying solar panel technology, but it still has not been used beyond the orbit of Mars. And at Mars, the solar intensity is 50% of what it is here at Earth, and I'm talking about going down to 1%. So there's historical evidence, if you want to look at that, that says we haven't been able to do it yet, and there's nothing on the drawing boards that says it's going to be available in the near future. And probably the most convincing information to me on the availability of solar panels is that we have a lot of industrial contractors out there that are very interested in making profit on space programs. And if they thought they could sell solar panels to go to the outer planets, they'd be pounding at our doors. And there's nobody doing that. There's nobody who has ever built a solar panel and had to fly one that's been able to find a way to make this technology operate out there where we're talking about.
Well, if I could quote from the Florida Today article, May in 1995, follow it with me if you will. If given the money to do the work, within 5 years, the European Space Agency could have solar cells ready to power a space mission to Saturn, said Carla Signorini, a physicist with the agency in Holland. And again, Dr. Gerhard Strobel, who is the scientist that is working with ESA to do a mission called Rosetta beyond Jupiter to a comet that is using all solar, he told a German national audience on television on June 23rd that we can do solar on Cassini. He said it would necessitate a redesign of Cassini, because right now Cassini is overweight for solar. That's why you hear these comments that it would take 2 tennis courts size of solar arrays. That's because they're talking about putting solar on the existing spacecraft Cassini. It was designed for nuclear power, not solar power. You redesign Cassini, and Strobel, who has done this mission, who is doing this stuff for the European Space Agency on Rosetta, saying we can do it. Well, this is different from what we're hearing just now. So we think that there's growing evidence, real evidence, that solar will work out to deep space. They're making major breakthroughs. Are we saying that we don't have confidence that NASA, with their top scientists, can work this problem out? Are we saying that we're going to accept that we're never going to go forward here? Years ago, this was 1995. That's 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago. This scientist is saying within 5 years we can have solar ready for the Cassini mission. So why take the risk? Is it worth it? We can wait a couple years, do it properly, advance solar technology. It'll have major benefits here on Earth. Why don't we do that?
We need to get on the next question, but I would just invite anyone here, if they would like to call anybody at the European Space Agency. The European Space Agency would love to talk to you about this issue. The European Space Agency does not agree that they could do this mission solar.
Well, they don't agree with their own scientists then.
And they'd be happy to discuss that with you. Just call them.
Scientists don't always agree.
With next questioner is Maria Whipple.
Yeah, it's Maria Teleska Whipple, and I'm a Rockledge, Florida resident, and I'm speaking not only for myself, but for two very small children I have at home that have no voice in this matter, and also two young women I've been sitting with all evening who go to school over here on the beaches right where the launch is going to be shot over their head. We've been speaking tonight about risks and whatnot. I don't know if the folks in the room realize your chance of it exploding on launch is greater than winning the Florida lottery. My question is to Mr. Lay, who is in charge of Brevard County Emergency Management. I know Congress passed an act in 1990, the Price-Anderson Act, stating if an explosion occurs and we are all irradiated, homeowners insurance will not cover our losses. The federal government will not cover our radiation cancer treatments. No one is going to pay our mortgage. No one is going to replace our jobs. We are SOL. What is going to happen to the residents of Brevard County and the children of Brevard County in this kind of scenario? My sister's a firefighter with Melbourne Fire Department. They received from emergency planning here in Brevard County a very brief, as a matter of fact, it was, we will inform you on an as-needed basis what to do in case there is a plutonium release on launch.
You know, so do you want him to answer the question?
I would like him to know, yeah, what exactly can we actually expect from emergency management?
Let me start, and I may have to have some help from some other people here. But and I'm sure there's lots of people that can help. But let me just tell you that first of all, we've looked at all the analysis that's been done, starting with the safety analysis to what we've seen today. We see nothing that indicates what you just postulated is going to happen.
That's what he's going to say now, I think.
But what's the plan?
Would you?
Right.
No.
Let me finish, please. There is a Titan launch. This is going up on the Titan vehicle. I have seen Titan launches stopped because wind was blowing in the wrong direction. Wind was blowing over populated areas of Brevard County that would exceed a toxic, yes ma'am, I've seen that. And I'm very, no, it's not that cloud. And I'm very happy to say that the Air Force took that very seriously. They stopped that launch, and it was only just a 1 part per million.
But we...
Now, because of that,
Yeah, well,
could you hold, wait just a minute. He will answer the question if he has the volume available left over after you take it. So let him give it a shot.
The plan is, and I think in all their documents you'll see, that absolute worst case is about 19 square kilometers could receive, absolute worst case could receive plutonium. Well, I just talked to you about the wind, but even worst case, and they factored the winds in, and that 19 square kilometers remains at Kennedy, Canaveral Air Station and Kennedy Space Center.
Well,
there is no, if there was a possibility, believe you, we would have signed right up on that environmental impact statement saying those same kind of things.
Well, I've received information.
But the plans that are in place is, in fact, the federal government fully intends, if they have to compensate people and cover it, they will do that.
Then why is Congress pass an act stating that they have no legal liability?
Let me finish.
That is not true.
Let me finish. When I was quoted earlier, and I will say it again, there is no condition that's going to cause a release in air. The overpressures and the shrapnel and the explosion in the air will not cause a release. When we talk about any release at all, that's on impact on the ground. It's on when things hit in the wrong way, and it's something that's very small and stays very localized. We're not talking about something released in a cloud that's moving any place. If there is an accident, what you're going to see is a huge cloud. You've got 2 million pounds of propellant, of toxic propellant. That's what he's talking about here. And there are all kinds of plans in place to deal with the people of Brevard County and around here because 2 million pounds of toxic propellant are going to be in the air.
And who will come as a tourist to Brevard County if there's plutonium RTGs released or not?
There will be RTG blocks that we will go pick up. This is very expensive and valuable material. I also am a mother. I also am a grandmother. My children intend to be here and watch this launch. I don't intend to have them standing someplace where I think they're going to be injured any more than I expect your children to be. Any more than I expect your children to be.
Bruce, do you have a specific reply to that?
Well, I just want to
How
remind...
much do you think they can pay me to endanger my children? What do you think that price is?
Bruce?
I would just like to remind the audience, last January when the Delta rocket exploded, you might remember that purple toxic cloud that first drifted out to the ocean, and then the winds changed. And you know, I'm told that the winds have different varying levels, where they blow it in different directions at different levels. Well, that toxic cloud then began to drift as far south as Vero Beach.
Right over my house. 100 miles south.
So, you know, the fact is, they say, well, we're not going to launch if the winds are blowing inland. Well, I'm sorry, but the winds change and they move at different levels at different altitudes.
Thomas Farrell is the next questioner.
Be a little redundant. My name is Thomas Farrell. I'm from Palm Bay, Florida. The
Could
question
you speak up? I don't think they can hear you in the
The
mic.
question is to Mr. Gagnon. Mr. Gagnon, there is a enormous contingent of talent that has been pooled across the planet for this particular venture into space. The stance of the Florida Coalition for Peace and Justice suggests that this pool of talent is collectively ignoring the safety factors that would jeopardize humanity on the whole planet. Do you believe, do you sincerely believe these people, of which there's only 3 representatives, from which there are probably thousands that worked on this project, that are doing this negligent and jeopardizing the people of this state and the people of the planet? Do you sincerely believe that?
Can I answer the question?
Thank you.
Louise,
and let them have a
well, you asked me the question, so I'll answer.
Mr. Gagnon will reply first.
Louise, would you put on the Daniel Golden one, please? This is an article from Space News dated March of 1994. Space News is an industry publication. I'm going to have to move over to a mic so I can read it. I'm afraid I can't read it from here. This is an interview with France Cordova, NASA's chief scientist, dated March of 1994. Says, talking about Cassini, says, we can't fail with that mission. It would be very, very damaging for the agency. We would not start Cassini today, Cordova said, at a Washington meeting of Space Science Working Group, an independent association of university researchers. It's a hard program for Golden, Daniel Golden, the director of NASA, to morally deal with because it has got a number of enormous risk factors. Cordova, noting that the Titan IV does not have a 100% success rate, said NASA fears a catastrophic loss. It is truly putting all your eggs in one basket, your 18 instruments on one firecracker, she said. After that risk, you have to think of Mars Observer. That's a mission that just disappeared off the radar screen. They didn't know what happened to it. That does not give Golden confidence. So I would submit my answer to that question is that NASA doesn't even have confidence in this mission.
Mr. Gagnon, you're probably not going to be picked up on the mics that are recording this.
They publicly say that they do, but they privately say that they don't. There's an article that just appeared yesterday about the Mir, where NASA was saying publicly that they have confidence in the Soviets with the Mir, but privately their own memos were saying that they didn't have confidence with the Russians with the Mir spacecraft. I believe that that it's important to recognize that there's an old public relations maxim, and it goes like this: don't manage the problem, manage the public outrage. And what I would tell you is going on today all over this world is that NASA's PR people and the Department of Energy, if you know anything about the Department of Energy, for years at nuclear weapon sites all over this country. I have many dear friends that have been organizing at DOE sites for years, and DOE has a horrible record of lying to the public.
The TV can't pick you up where you are.
Well, I'm
if you'd
almost
like
done.
to sit back here.
I'm almost done. I'm just saying that the Department of Energy has a horrible record of lying and misleading the public for years about contamination at Department of Energy sites, releases into the communities. Look at Rocky Flats in Colorado, Hanford up in Washington, Savannah River Plant in South Carolina, Oak Ridge Labs in Tennessee. It's all over the country. These are the same people that are telling us that these plutonium generators are indestructible. They're the same people that are telling us not to worry. But when we look at this article here, Daniel Golden and France Cordova, the chief scientists of NASA, are saying this has got so many risk factors, we wouldn't do it today.
Thank you. Is there some response from anyone?
Mr. Gagnon, that's a rather large charge to charge these people.
I'm going to turn this over to the other side here to answer the...
And let me just make one comment, then I'll let Mr. Spahalski talk to NASA's comment. But I will tell you that, you know, I also am an environmentalist. I also am very concerned about the environment and safety, and that's why I have spent the last 22 years of my career, in fact, and studied engineering and safety and looked at nuclear issues. That's why I chose this for a career. That's why I do what I do, because I want to make sure that technologies are used appropriately and used safely. That's my commitment to this. And we have asked and asked if people have analysis, if they have calculations they've done that show that Cassini is riskier than what we've said, if show that these things, our safety database is not correct, that they please provide them to us, and we have yet to have anything provided to us on anything that backs up the complaint.
In your lap tonight, you have one from Dr. Michio.
You have 10 pages of claims of numbers with nothing behind them, no calculations behind them, no database, and more importantly, what the gentleman asked earlier, no peer review by any scientific organization behind them.
It's Dr. John Goffman in California. He was one of the co-founders of uranium-235. He worked on the Manhattan Project with Edward Teller, and for a time he was the assistant director of Lawrence Livermore Labs, a Department of Energy facility. He had a falling out with Edward Teller when Teller wanted to widen the Panama Canal by using nuclear weapons to blow it up and make it bigger, and he left the Department of Energy at that time. He then went on to become a professor at the University of California at Berkeley, where he's now retired as an expert in radiological effects of contamination. And he himself has looked at NASA's environmental impact statement, where they now claim that only 120 people would be killed, or is it down to one person these days? Because I know those numbers keep shifting. But Goffman says that he believed the numbers could go up to 900,000. So here's a very eminent scientist that has looked at their numbers.
And has not also provided anybody with any documentation of his numbers. Not one calculation, not one documentation of anything that he's provided.
Excuse me. Would anyone down there like to answer or respond to the original question?
Well, the original question was of Mr. Gagnon relative to whether he believed that all the people involved in Cassini were overlooking or not considering the safety of people on the ground or anywhere else. The article that was shown, quoting France Cordova, the NASA chief scientist at the time, that article dealt with the restructuring of Cassini to reduce costs and to reduce risk for the overall mission. And what she is talking about in that article is the fact that it's the only mission going to the outer planets for a very long time, and it has to work through launch, and it has to work throughout the whole flight. Now, what NASA has done to minimize that risk, in addition to the things we have added to make the design more robust, they have instituted a total independent external review process to ensure that there's no oversight at all. This project, the spacecraft, the Huygens probe, the Italian contribution with the antennas, Colonel Everett's rocket from the bottom up, the Centaur, the Titan core, the solid rocket motors, have totally been reviewed by design agencies, independent, external to the project. They have looked at the actual hardware that is flying. They've reviewed all the paperwork on any discrepancies, and that process has been done for just the kind of concern this gentleman's question was talking about. And I don't see anything in that quote from Dr. Cordova that refutes that.
Okay. The next questioner is Sharon Spry. Is Sharon Spry in the audience? Well, Thomas Farrell. That was the last one. The one following this will be Bill Tanner.
Okay, my question was, when does acceptable risk move to unacceptable risk? What is your definition? What numbers are you going to use to delineate between the two? I mean, how do you determine that? What do those two words mean, acceptable, unacceptable risk? How many people have to get sick? How many people have to die? How much has to be contaminated before it becomes unacceptable?
Yeah, I will tell you what I'm one of the many people in this process. I'm one of the first in this review process. But I will tell you what I think is an unacceptable risk. If I thought there was going to be any hazard to human life in Florida, I would not have agreed to this mission. That's my definition.
Can you guarantee that there won't be? Can you guarantee that there won't be?
I've just spent 6 years and dealt with...
She can answer it the way she wants to.
To answer that question to myself, I spent 6 years going through every bit of this analysis with experts in these fields throughout the country, in fields of reentry analysis, breakup analysis, meteorological, biological effects, and every expert I could find in the fields that were dealt with in this to answer that question to myself, to guarantee to myself that I could answer that and believe it. And I believe it, or I wouldn't have my kids here.
Stuart?
I'd like to just ask one question. Your numbers change. You're saying that at the launch, at phase 1 of the launch, there's a 1 in 1,500 or something risk of an accident. But later on at phases 5, I guess it is, when the ship is over Africa, there's a 1 in 450 chance of an explosion or problem with the ship. 1 in 450, I don't play the lottery because I don't want to waste my money. If the odds were 1 in 450, I'd buy a ticket. I don't understand why that number changes.
And you saw a picture over here. You saw a picture what happens if something comes in like it would be over Africa.
If it came in on water, we saw the picture coming in on water. We didn't see a picture coming in on land.
I have pictures of those. I have pictures of those tests, pictures of re-entered. It took us 5 times through re-entry from Earth atmosphere to be able to even take off the first layer of containment here. And then we've impacted these against hard surfaces to look at what kind of release it would be. We're talking about something contained inside this block still. I know, I've looked at all of those.
But your own document says, the final environmental impact statement says...
I'll read it to you from the final environmental...
No, but I can tell you this. If it happens over Africa at phase 5, it's higher up in the atmosphere. It's possible that sort of the re-entry burn could, the heating could then sort of break open the 3 RTGs, at which point the 18 canisters within each RTG, we're talking 54 canisters now, are falling down onto the planet. The document says some of those canisters could vaporize.
No, it does not.
Your document, I'll show it to
Re-enter
you.
over Africa on that launch does not say that these could vaporize. I'm telling you, it doesn't say that.
Fine.
Let me read this to you.
I don't think we have time to read it.
We'll pull it out afterwards. You can read it.
We have time for me to read this sentence. Right out of the environmental impact statement. This is during the flyby. If there's a re-entry.
Different issue, isn't it?
Yes, different issue. And I'm going to...
We can talk about the flyby, but that's not what he's talking about.
Let me read it to you, all right? No, you don't want me to read it to them.
How long is it?
I'd love to have you read it, but that's not what her discussion was.
For all re-entry cases studied, about 32 to 34% of the fuel from the 3 RTGs is expected to be released at high altitude.
Open that up and read to them what the cover says. What day is that? That's the environmental impact statement that we did before the analysis was done. It was published in 1995.
So in other words, you don't stand by this document anymore. You've changed the numbers.
We completed the analysis. We completed the reviews. We completed the analysis.
Folks, this says final environmental impact statement.
That's right.
Final environmental impact statement.
And as
they didn't expect people all over the world to read it, but when they did start reading it, and they started reading the numbers inside, they went and changed it with a supplemental environmental impact statement.
I'd invite you to read the backup documents that support the numbers.
I think we got the point across a few decibel points lower. Mr. Tanner.
Yes, we are.
Thank you. Bill Tanner from Palm Bay. My question is, what is NASA's or the other space agencies of the world's #1 goal of this project?
Well, the goal is science. The goal is the acquisition of knowledge that's useful to understand how the solar system works and how we fit in the universe as a total process. Saturn, we didn't take the time to discuss it, but Saturn is like a miniature solar system. I described some of the characteristics of the satellites. It has behavior that is we can analyze to understand how our solar system works and fits into the rest of the cosmic universe. It has a satellite, which is the only moon known in the solar system to have an atmosphere. That atmosphere has about the same composition as nitrogen as we have here on Earth. The rest of it is made up of other material. It's very cold, and because it's cold, it's about 2 billion years behind the Earth in evolution. So it offers us the opportunity to look and investigate what the Earth and the processes that existed 2 billion years ago may have been. They're no longer here on our planet. They're no longer anywhere else available in the universe, and it gives us that kind of insight. And this is just another step in understanding how the universe ticks, whether you're talking about a Hubble spacecraft or a shuttle orbiter or any of the spacecraft that go throughout the solar system.
Can we wait 3 years for that information? 3 years we can do it with solar, 0 risk.
I'd like to follow up.
Excuse me, I don't believe you have the floor.
I'd like to just follow up with a comment. Thank you. I appreciate that. I guess I'm just I'm comfortable with the science.
I believe that you have an opportunity to respond to
Anybody
what
wants
they were saying.
I'm just following up with a comment. Can I do that?
No.
Oh, I can't do that?
No.
Okay.
We need to move on. We were very short here. We've got a real short agenda. We've got like 20 minutes left. You're going to respond by calling on the person in the audience.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Horst Polar to get up, identify yourself, your expertise, and give us your interpretation of the RTG question, if you would.
Well, the RTGs are things that
You have to go to a mic. You have to go to a microphone.
I'm sorry this wasn't more of a scientific debate. This is a political debate.
Please identify yourself.
Excuse me. I don't think this is actually on the point of the last question.
PhD from Columbia University.
We didn't. Excuse me.
22 years experience at the Space Center. 15 years as senior scientist. I think that the whole thing is outrageous. I'd like to ask a few questions. If it's so safe, why do they have to cancel the insurance? Why, if it's so safe, why cancel the insurance? One question. If it's so safe, why can it not be flown on an airplane? You cannot fly these RTGs on an airplane because an airplane that would have to be encased in a casket that would stand a high-velocity crash. What about the high-velocity crash in a Titan missile that's flying over our head with a chance of 1 in 19 in failure? How do you answer that question?
Okay, well, let's give them a chance to answer it.
I'll answer
Could you
that
please
question.
be seated and let them have a chance to answer it,
Yeah.
please? The next questioner is going to be Sharna West.
I'd be happy
She
to
could come
answer
to the
that
microphone,
question,
please.
and that is, this block is designed to withstand the crash.
Fly on an airplane.
I know, I'm telling you the answer to...
fly on an airplane. It's against
Could you please
regulation.
let her answer the
It has to
question?
stand a high-velocity crash, and it can't. It's going to be
Could you
flown
please let
over
her
our
answer
head
the
with
question?
a 1 in 19 chance of blowing up.
There's a difference between releasing of nuclear materials and whether the RTG itself will work afterwards. The outside containment... Let me finish answering the question, sir, please. You can't fly it in the air... We don't put it on an airplane because we don't want to break the RTG. If that plane crashed, the RTG itself won't work afterwards. The aluminum, the unicouples, the thing that converts the heat to electricity, will break. I'm not going to release any plutonium, but the RTG isn't going to work.
You don't mention the direct course experiment where they put one of these RTGs next to an explosive 25 feet away, and the whole thing disappeared. They couldn't even find the pieces. What about that?
And that was a very well characterized explosion, and that explosion is in overpressures that are nowhere near what you can get in a very well characterized Titan accident.
Excuse me,
It was never
Mr.
repeated.
Polar, is it? Is it Mr. Polar?
My name is Dr. Polar.
What's your name?
Horst Polar.
Okay, could you please be seated? We have someone else ready to ask a question, and we have very little time left to deal with these.
Oh, I appreciate it. Let me just say one thing. I have a very scientific document here that details all the things that could happen that are wrong with it. It's called the plutonium story. Any member of the press, or any member from the library is welcome to get a copy, and I wish they would read it. Thank you very much.
Is Sharna West here?
Tip it down a little bit.
Just pull it down.
Yeah. There you go.
I'm Shayna West,
Shayna, I'm sorry.
and I just wondered, like, why we had to worry about Saturn when, or whatever, when we had Earth to worry about, like our.
Is it Shauna? Shayna. I'm sorry. I'll tell you what the questions. What makes sense to me about this mission, and the other people that your age that I talk to, and that is what Dr. Spahalski talked about, looking at a planet that's developing and looking how life developed. One of the things we look at a lot on this planet is global change. What's happening? How's the planet changing? And to understand how the planet's changing, you got to know how it formed. You have to know how life formed. I think one of the exciting things to me going to Saturn and looking at these planets in formation is to try to figure out how this planet forms and how it's changing. That's why I want to go to Saturn.
Mr. Gagnon, you have someone to call on for that?
I would like to invite one of our friends to respond to this particular question. His name is Bobby C. Billy. He's the spiritual leader of the independent traditional Seminole Nation. And since we're talking about Earth and space exploration, I would like him to put it in some context for us.
Thank you. Good. I'm going to speak of another spiritual leader here. And you're good at that, answering those questions. But you're not speaking for the future of the people. I wish you stop and think about your future of the people, not unborn kids yet. And that important to all people, all creations. And talking about discovered the new planet, and we were number well, like seems like yesterday to us, when the first European come into our country. It's just like this paradise here one time. But you came in and they trashed the area. Now you're going to look into another area, the trash, to dump the trash again. There is enough time to stop. There is a hope on the earth. We can give the young people we're speaking about just a while ago. We can stop and work on the earth, our home. Maybe we can clean the water. Maybe we can clean the earth. Maybe we can clean the air. Maybe we can have rain again. Back in 40 years back, we used to have rain almost every day. The main people, the knowledge they have, we keep telling them not to dig a ditch. Do not mess with the natures. You will change the life. They will not listen. We have the technology. We have a mind can do what we want. They went ahead and dug the ditches, and disturbed the cycle of life, the whole creation of the gift, the all creation. So you take another step beyond of the bounty of the Creator have gave us, which is when you look at those pictures you have created, it's just almost the same thing around us, the air. That's a bounty to us. We cannot go beyond that. and you breaking the law of the Creator, which means God or Jesus, what we call. And I ask you not to do so. Again, first you came onto our country and you will not listen, and now you're destroying the earth. And you're looking for another place to destroy it. And I ask you not to do it. It's wrong if you believe in yourself and your people, a future of the people. And traveling through the states and the government, or speaking to the people, that's what I do, speaking for the future generation of the people. Let's do something about the air. Let's do something about the water we drink. You might be looking at me. You think I'm different, but we do not. We all drinking one water. We all breathing the same air. We all eating the same food. We all know different. When we get hurt, we call it God. What we do wrong.
Thank you.
Why you don't? Why you're not
10 minutes
supporting
left,
us?
and I need to get 2 or 3 more
You
questions
don't know why
in.
you're not supporting yourself.
Could you please
think about it?
Wrap it up.
And to speak for the people, not to yourself and the industry or the people or the government. Is the people the one that make it happen, not you. Thank you.
Chris Greenstein. Chris Greenstein. Followed by Catherine Stanton. And we are nearing the end, and we will end probably about 2 minutes before 9. So if you could keep your answers succinct, that would be appreciated.
Okay.
I'm assuming that some of these people will be here to chat afterwards, and we are also going to try to get a lot of the 2 or 3 dozen questions that we haven't answered yet answered in some form and print them in the papers, if that helps at all.
My name is Chris Greenstein. I represent O'Galley High School, ROTC program. The taxpayers should have the right to make the decision on whether or not the probe is launched, but doesn't the majority support the launch anyway?
Do you want to direct that to anyone in particular?
To both sides, if they're.
Well, I would say the fact is the majority of people in the United States, and in this particular case, because there are global implications from a flyby, possibility of a flyby accident, the majority of the people in the world don't yet know about this launch. And that's why we've been calling for years for there to be congressional debate about this idea of launching nuclear power into space. And so I agree with you. I think if the people overwhelmingly speak, then we would have to live with that, because I do respect the people's right to make decisions in a democratic society. But the fact of the matter is the people have not been given the chance at all. We've not had the first hearing in Congress yet, ever, on this idea of launching nuclear power into space. And can that be so wrong for the people, the taxpayers, in growing numbers? I just found out today that the Massachusetts State House of Representatives passed a resolution opposing Cassini within the last 2 or 3 days. The Newton, Massachusetts City Council has passed a resolution opposing Cassini within the last 2 or 3 days. The Mendocino, California, and the Marin, California Board of Supervisors, the county commissions, have voted to oppose the Cassini launch. And they've urged their congresspersons to make that known to President Clinton, who has final launch authority. So the truth is, as people are just beginning to learn about this mission, as we get closer and closer and the controversy swirls and the media begins to cover it, there's growing evidence that there's alarm and concern about it. So I think we should have public debate. I would welcome that. Thank you.
Okay. If I can address your question, of course, Cassini is approved by the federal government and all the processes that operate within the government, and that's an elected process to which all people participate in. So yes, it is. We do that and we follow the rules. But I'd like to acquaint you with some additional information. About 2 years ago, we invited people to send their signature to Saturn on Cassini. We did this by putting a note in our web page that we would do this, and we'd scan them and put them on a CD-ROM, so their signatures could fly with us. The response to that was outstanding. We got responses from 84 countries spread around the world. We got over 600,000 signatures on our disk, and we could have continued to collect them.
And how many of those little children knew that there were
Give him a
plutonium on
chance to
board
answer,
Cassini,
please.
sir?
I'd
Did
like
you tell them
Gagnon-
that?
Mr. Gagnon?
I'm just telling you the interest of people. When you think about somebody's signature, that is something that is unique to the individual, and they wanted to share the experience of being able to participate in space flight, and that's what I'm telling you. There's data there that says the world is interested in doing this kind of thing.
Thank you. Catherine Stanton. This will likely be the last question unless it is answered very quickly.
Last but not least, I'd just like to mention that the Sierra Club nationally has come out against the Cassini also. And I'm sorry for Lieutenant Colonel Thomas, who hasn't been asked a question, so I would like to ask you a question, sir.
Very good.
If there is a third occurrence, I don't know how you refer to it in the Air Force, occurrence mishap on the Titan IV, will this mission be scrubbed?
Let me answer that by telling you that this is the newest version of the Titan IV. We flew it successfully in February. It was a highly successful mission. We reviewed the data from that to improve upon the success. And just as any mission, we always get better. I'm not anticipating a failure on this one.
The question, sir, was if there is a third occurrence, will it be scrubbed?
I believe Mr. DeLay tried to answer that, and he was shot it down. The approval process to launch, maybe you don't know this, is thousands of people. 29 different people in the process is polled for go, no-go. The data is reviewed up into 0.9 seconds before it lifts off.
Right.
Should something happen, I believe Mr. DeLay was trying to tell you that we've looked at all the opportunities for any incident, and we think we're prepared to handle those.
You're already in a delay
I think
now.
your question is, though, if there's another...
Excuse me, let him give a chance to answer.
Yeah,
this
I want to clarify. Your question is if you have another Titan launch between now and Cassini and there's a failure,
No, that was not the question. We know that there have been 2 mishaps with the Titan IV. The last one has caused the delay to be, I believe the current launch date is now the 13th of October, correct? As of the other day, that was the newspaper's
Right,
report.
that wasn't a mishap of the Titan IV.
Kathy, I think you have some. Are you talking about the fact that
October
the Centaur,
13th?
There have been 2 problems
The
with
Centaur,
the Cassini. There've been 2 problems with this launch. In one instance, the Centaur leaked.
Okay.
In the other instance, the Huygens probe had a problem. Those weren't necessarily problems with the Titan IV. Is that what your question is? Are you talking about the?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. On the Titan countdown demonstration, there was a leak in liquid hydrogen. We went back and we tried to determine that leak. But let me remind you, that was a test. And the test was designed to find a leak before we go to a launch. The test gave us what we wanted. We went in and we made a repair.
Right.
And
you've
there's
had to
nothing
change the
dangerous
date
about the probe.
of the launch from the 6th.
Okay, I'd
Anyway,
like to maybe work in
that's
one
my
more question.
Thank you.
She was sort of making a statement there. Sue Cannon, if we might get a real quick one in.
I think Reverend Bowman would like to make a question.
The burial mountain for nuclear waste in Nevada is, I guess, basically a failure. It was supposed to cost $80 million, and now they spent almost $4 billion, and there's leaks and fissures and everything. So basically, the government's plan for a place to put nuclear waste is a failure. And they claim they have no plan B. So tell me, is outer space the plan B?
Absolutely not.
No.
I get questions on a regular basis. People from all over the country write to me saying, why don't we just launch it? And my personal response and the response of the Department of Energy and the response of NASA is that we have no intention of launching nuclear waste into space.
Okay, thank you. We are going to have to give Mr. Gagnon a chance to respond to this, and then we're going to have to wrap it up.
Yeah. Well, in closing, I'd like to thank the Florida Today and all of you for coming, especially you that have come tonight, no matter which side of the fence you're on this issue. I think it's an important discussion. I think when we're dealing with technology, and with plutonium mixed into the equation, that it's an important and vital discussion for us in the state of Florida and around the world. I would like to say to you that I believe Cassini is a bad seed. I believe that we've, as Bobby Billy said, we've polluted this earth. We have a pretty poor record of living on this planet. We are now poised to move out into outer space. And I believe we must have a discussion that includes ethics and morality and peace and environment as we move towards outer space. And I believe the question of nuclear power and of weapons in space and of colonization and exploitation and mineral mining and resource extraction are important steps for us as a human species as we move forward. And I believe that these questions in this discussion should not be left to the so-called scientists, that we, the citizens in a democratic society, should have a right to raise the points, to have opinions, and to have discussions.
Would you like 30 seconds to the end too, and then I'm going to wrap it up real fast here.
Well, I agree with Mr. Gagnon that this is a forum for discussion, and I appreciate your turnout here as well, again, on both sides of the issue. Discussions like this can be productive and important to people to completely understand the issue. I think there's a lot of information available from the documents that have been produced in the process of development of Cassini. I don't think that that information always makes it down to the people on the level that they have to vote and approve the people who instill these kind of programs. I encourage you to become familiar with the program, look for alternate sources of information other than the activist groups that are against the project. There's sources available from computer technology as well as documentation, and I invite you to use it.
We are going to have to close. We really thank you for attending this evening. We thank our panelists for doing a great job.